Is China collapsing? Are the BRICS nations actually about to take over the world, or is there something more to the story? You came here for the truth, so let me unveil that for you. I'm going to show you what's going on. I'm going to give you both sides of the equation, and I'm going to tell you exactly what you need to know, not what you want to hear. That's what we do here. We get into the cold hard truth. So if you'll join me, we'll begin with this. West's 500-year dominance is ending, according to Lavrov, the foreign minister of Russia. He had a few things to say, including the 500-year-long dominance of the West is coming to an end, being replaced by a new polycentric world. We were discussing the multipolar world. It's emerging after 500 years of domination of what we call the collective West. During this meeting, they're talking in Doha. And of course, this is a period of time in which there has been a big change and a growing divide in between the West and the East. And so we can see that these two factions, these two sides have formed, and now we are in the new world. Some have suggested that it's going to be China at the front and center. Others have said, no way, they are not going to convince many people to get on board with them. What I'm seeing, what we keep hearing about, is the multipolar world, and oftentimes right now in the media, as well as what they've said themselves, is the global south. All right, now with that, I want to show you something. You could see it, that these are the fastest growing economies in 2023. Look around the world. Did you think Libya would be one of those economies? And now we have Guyana as well. And certainly with Guyana coming in the news, with everything that's been happening with Venezuela, it's something to note. But the point here, and the reason I mention this, is that we look around the world, and do you see Canada on that list, or the United States, or the UK, or what about Australia? No, they're not, and likely won't be included in the fastest growing economies for the foreseeable future. Usually what happens is we have these emerging economies. They grow fast. Maybe they have higher inflation, maybe a little bit of turmoil, but they grow and grow and grow. And at some point they begin to mature and that growth starts to slow down. Maybe their population gets too old. Things happen. We have seen this before. So we have to start asking the questions of what is going on here. Is this a bump in the road, or is that likely it? The growth is now no longer there and countries become Japan, where it's just a decline and inevitable and unable to ever get out of that unless something major changes. A lot is happening today, and I want to bring you some of the intricacies because it's going to tell you what's happening for yourself as well and how you're going to be drastically impacted by the changes we see today. U.S. companies are finding it hard to avoid China. You could see this, I know this very clearly and intimately, because when you try to source a product, I would like you to give it a try. Source a product from somewhere, anywhere, and you will find that if it's not actually manufactured in China, it's probably being manufactured in China. If you understand what I'm trying to say here, one way, shape, or form. Did you know that the factories, if you remember during 2020, early on in 2020, if you know what I'm trying to say, we heard, okay, something was happening inside of China, but also in the northeastern part of Italy. That's odd. Why there? Well, they happen to have a lot of factories there. Those factories owned and operated by the same people inside of China where the epicenter was. This so-called made in Italy, well, technically within the borders, but no different than if it was made in that other country. In addition to that, you look at all the components that are part of any goods that we buy today, and China's got its hands on it. Now, if you want to change that, if you want to make this say, okay, we want to do away with that, we want to go in a different direction. If you're Apple, you can invest billions and billions of dollars and start to slowly steer that ship. But if you're a small and medium-sized business, you can't do that because you don't have billions to start opening up the factories, getting the ports set up, like getting all the logistics. You can't do that. That needs to take time and time and time in order to make that happen. Right now, today, not possible. Okay. You can get stuff manufactured in the United States, for instance. You will pay much, much more for that. And I'm talking much more. And at a time in which people are struggling, finding it difficult, it isn't a very real possibility to stay in business a lot of times when people are struggling as it is. So that's what we see, and that's why there has been such dominance. But remember, this was done intentionally. Shipping the jobs overseas was not an accident, my friends. Can China get its economic miracle back on track in 2024? Certainly, there are so many problems going on. Of course, you've got the real estate, you've got the debt, and you've got the shadow banking system, which I've talked about on numerous occasions. But one after the other, this has been a very big issue for China to try and grow out of something when there just is no growth. At the same time, the world is either in a recession or trying to avoid a recession, slower growth, higher interest rates, not good for China being the manufacturer of the world, right? At the same time, domestically, Chinese shoppers are saving for rainy days. Foreign films pulled money out. Manufacturers face waning demand from the West. Local government finances wobbled. Property developers defaulted. So we see that model of China can grow forever. We're the engine of the world. We're going to make this happen. But then the whole thing shut down for, arguably more than 2 years. And that presented an issue for the entire thing. And that's why you started to have Evergrande, Country Garden. These things started to tumble because all of that which was in line before it started to encounter some problems. And so this is what China has to try and get out of, but it's not so easy. Heavily indebted poor countries, you could see the total loans from China. So these countries here, whether it's Ghana, you look down the list, they have this infrastructure that China is working on. They're building, they're taking loans from China, and they owe China a lot. So are they going to be able to pay back? Well, this is what they've talked about a lot. Africa is heavily in debt to China. We will see what happens there, but I'm not sure of how that's going to unfold. But just know that there's creditors and debtors, and certainly we see that China has been a creditor nation to countries overwhelmingly in Africa. So we see that now. So there's a lot of nuance here if you see that, right? China's economy is heading deeper into deflation. And so they do have these aspects where, yes, they're a creditor nation. That is a strength of any country. But at the same time, they've got their own problems to worry about where they had tried to create some level of stimulus, but still, going into a deflationary circumstance is an issue for China. Okay. And so you'll see that right here where basically core CPI inflation remained weak, likely reflecting sluggish domestic economic momentum in the near term, according to Goldman Sachs. They need to get that fixed if they want to grow. But that's the problem. How can they do that right now at this time when there just isn't the demand? You have to have real demand. You can't just, snap your fingers and create growth. You can't do that when you have millions and millions and millions of empty homes already with nobody, not even investors willing to just throw their money in to park that somewhere. That's what's going on. That's what has come up in this last little while and very evident, over the last year. The opportunity is the current property crisis. Nearly all major private builders, including the giant ones like Evergrande and Country Garden, have defaulted on their massive debts, leaving the construction of a large residential projects delayed or stalled. And I've seen, and you've probably seen that too, where they just dynamite the whole thing and that's it. Okay? I guess they're just taking back the concrete, taking back the copper. There isn't an official tally of unfinished homes, but they think it's about 20 million units nationwide. I've heard numbers a little larger than that. Who knows? It's millions. Okay, it's millions and millions of them. It would cost $440 billion to complete them all. So you'll see that here. Unsold properties, in terms of square meters, we've actually been higher before, but we'll see. Nobody really knows what the real numbers are. Come on, let's be honest. But that's basically just going into depth into that. And we have this back and forth between the United States and China, and it continues. China's ban on Apple iPhone accelerates. So this goes into any state-backed company. They can't bring it, so they can own it. They can own the phone, but you can't bring it into work. So what are people going to do? Obviously, they're not going to. They don't want to get in trouble. I'm sure they don't want to get in trouble there. So maybe they'll just use a different phone that they're not going to have an issue with, that they can bring into work, that they can actually communicate with their family, friends, and so on. And so that will have an impact materially on Apple sales. Because remember, Apple is a company, biggest company in the world. Apple's a company that doesn't just sell to the United States or just into Europe. They're a global company. And if you can't get as many buyers out of China, because state-backed companies, that's a lot of companies. It's not just the government workers. So we can see this back and forth here, and there's that divide. So I see from the Middle East and East, that's pretty much one faction. And then you have, the West being on the rest of that. It's not necessarily, BRICS and so on, although over time that's changing. That is changing big time. And what that means is that your future is going to look very different. There's no question about that. And we need to start asking the right questions of, number one, is where I'm living the right place? And number two is, what's my backup plan? What is my backup plan? Do I have a way out? Or is it simply, I'm just going to stay, I'm just going to wait, and that's it? You should definitely have a plan B. And you should also have a plan C. But I think a lot of people, they are just simply ignoring it, hope for the best, and so on. I think we got to plan for the worst and hope for the best. China's surging steel exports risk new round of trade tensions. Once again, this is more back and forth, and we will see that continue on, although, we did have some positivity recently, but there's been some talk about, that's didn't really work out the way that China's leader had hoped when he came into California. Who knows? It's all speculation, of course. But here we have it, looking at basically just saying that with China and the way that things have worked more recently, the low-cost sort of environment is an issue for deflation. So China's always trying to undercut on prices. That's a problem when you're in a situation where you have deflation. You want to create more inflation, higher prices, higher wages, higher. That's the growth that shows up in the GDP reports. That's what they want to see. But you've got this other issue here where they can't handle that. Anyway, this is what's happening right now. And the biggest concern for China is that deflation becomes entrenched. They can't stimulate growth. They can't stimulate consumption domestically. If they're in that circumstance, they have slower growth, and then other countries can grow beyond them, and they could become more dominant, and who knows where their alliances will be. You see, if you're a growing economy, if you're India, for instance, and you're looking around the world and you're saying, I got to do business, I got to do trade with one country. Maybe that's Russia. Maybe that's, somebody in the Middle East, right? United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia. And you're saying, I've got to do business with these different countries. And so if I don't necessarily have anything against a particular country, no issue. I'll do business with you. I'll do business with you. But as time goes on, you want to have friendly relations with those who are going to grow more, because that's going to benefit your people, right? If you're the leader of that economy, you would say, the more trade we do with this country, well, then that means we can export more to them. And then my country is going to benefit from that. So yeah, I want to do business with them. And you want to do things for your people. And that's what I see with what's happening with Saudi Arabia and what's happening United Arab Emirates and so on. That's what the whole new BRICS, the new elements of the BRICS, they made it very clear. They want to export more oil, but if China's demand has weakened, they don't need as much of the stuff they did before. This is the dilemma. This is the concern. And I want to know what you think. If you found this informative, hit that thumbs up button, because doing so supports me and it notifies the algorithm that this is some interesting stuff. And I think the dynamics here are wild, What's going to happen? Do you have any idea? I mean, this is interesting when we look at it at each step of the way. What I would love you to do is to check out my free course, Compass. Over 1,000 people have made it through this course totally free. Financial education is no longer, beyond with the gatekeepers, and you got to go to, school for all these things. You get it right here for free. No email needed, no paywall, no nothing. It's all available at themoneygps.com. All I ask is that you hit that thumbs up button to support me. And of course, I want you back here tomorrow. I'll see you then. Take care.